correct, Nick? Yeah. Yep, correct. Yep, there we go, yeah.
Maybe I'll ask him a tornado question, if we should expect any more tornadoes in Topeka.
Yeah, or maybe, I don't know if he'll know tornadoes, or he'll just know tragedy in the Midwest, or something like that. So hopefully, this is him. Paranormal Adventure Radio on Radio Rich and Friends.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey, Cliff. Thank you so much.
Boy, we're fading out. Am I connected?
Yeah, I hear you just fine right now.
Yeah, we hear you great. Can you hear us?
Uh-oh.
Well,
I hear you.
We hear you, but he can't hear us.
I guess I'll have to
I hear
hang
you.
up and dial in. We've just been having terrible time with the phone here.
Yeah, can you hear us right now?
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh,
no.
so he can't hear us.
He can't hear us.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm assuming you're connected, but I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect and dial in one more time.
Okay.
All right. Are there everything going on our boards? Everything looks good on the boards. Yeah. There we go. Let's hope.
Could it be the full moon?
It could be. Yeah, there we go. Paranormal Adventure
Hello.
Radio.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's Clif.
Hi.
hey, Cliff.
Well, I've got a little bit of sound this time.
Good.
Oh, good. Excellent.
We apologize. I don't know what's going on with our server or what's going on. Everything on our board looks great, so we appreciate your time tonight.
Sure, yeah, no problem at all.
So I know everyone's
had a real issue dialing in. The numbers were repeatedly busy, so
yeah. I think everyone kept asking where's. Everyone said
go on this device over here. Just 1 second, okay?
Okay.
Okay, how's that?
Sounds great. Yeah, everyone keeps calling in and says, "Where's Cliff?"
That's why the lines were busy.
So tell us a little bit about how you started your web predictions.
I came across the idea that it was occurring, that people were psychic and they were leaking this information out. And it dawned on me as a result of that idea that, well, maybe I could gather up all of the aggregate bits of the psychicness leaking out on this new thing that had just appeared that everybody was calling the Internet. This was back when browsers were basically Mozilla or Mosaic, and or you crafted your own. So at that point, it was like figuring out a way to aggregate what I saw occur in how people use language. I was working for a large, not-to-be-named software company north of me here in Washington, and had experience with lots of people being brought in from all over the planet to work on software projects, and also having experience with these people and how they dealt with code. And so it dawned on me that there were certain formulas that were appearing relative to language that seemed to have a prescient component to it, and then I just set about writing code that would sort of drag a giant strainer through the net looking for specific differences in language.
That's interesting. I mean, I love what you're doing. I mean, I really do. And of course, I try to read all of your predictions. Tell us a little bit. We'll get down to the meat because I have so many questions from the people listening. Tell us a little bit about accuracy. This is a question that you answer very well, so that's the reason I'm asking. I'm not asking because of the lack of.
Sure, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the issue with accuracy is twofold. How do we define it, and then how often does it occur? And in our case, what we have a tendency to do is we define accuracy based on how much of a percentage of the linguistics we forecast actually show up in the places that we forecast. So we might say that, the following list of 30 words that I've basically strewn together into a little mini story here will show up in the mainstream media in 3 weeks, and this little mini story describes a power outage. And we've got 30 words there. Well, if within 3 weeks later those words show up, well, then we've got accuracy relative to where it showed up, and accuracy relative to how it showed up in the sense of the number of words that we forecast showing up in the mainstream media. And in some cases, we've been really staggeringly scary accurate, like 94%, I think, on the power outage language. The descriptions we had, everything that was within 94% of the language showed up as forecast. within the time frame forecast. Some are less accurate within the details, but accurate at the archetype, and that would be like the forecast that we had for marine disasters, maritime disasters. Just couldn't get over it. It was going for a year or more, and it turned out, of course, to be the Columbia space shuttle, the spaceship disaster. And so when the shuttle went, then it dawned on me, oh, Columbia, and all the associations between the shuttle and maritime and so on, and it met all the linguistics. In that case, we had maybe 56% of the linguistics that we had been using about what we thought was going to be or what I thought was going to be a big maritime disaster actually end up getting used relative to that. And some of the quirky bits that convinced me that indeed that was the case, that I was off in my interpretation, was that in the interpretation we had stuff about the maritime disaster being related somehow to the areas of Palestine, and I just couldn't figure it out unless this big ship was going to crash in Israel, or there was going to be an attack on a boat there or something. It just never made any sense, but it was in there. And of course, a lot of the debris from the Columbia spaceship disaster fell on Palestine, Texas. And spelled the same way and everything. We just can't tell the difference in our geographic references. So even at that level, it was accurate, even though it was inaccurate. So basically what I say is that we're about twice as good as chance would allow. And so that's probably good enough to pay attention to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love it. It's definitely a great thing to read. It's fascinating to read, And whenever you start, especially the most recent edition, a couple weeks later, we had heavy flooding in Australia happen. So it's definitely interesting. I don't know can we talk about the current issue at all? Or?
Sure. Yeah.
So
whatever you want to discuss.
Yeah. What do you think about the? This is one of the questions I received about Australia. I think there was some terminology about Australia in the most recent edition, and about flooding.
Yeah, Australia is going to be uniquely placed for some Terra events this year. It doesn't appear it will be catastrophic in the sense of Australia going walkabout, but the Terra events will have twofold effects on Australia. Not only will Australia itself be affected by floods and rampaging fires and earthquakes, but volcanic activity to the north is going to create a huge global problem. I don't know if that will actually end up being in 2011 or if it'll be in early 2012, because the time indicators are not that accurate on something this large. But the archetype shows that volcanic activity will force the sudden evacuation of maybe tens of millions of people, with only really one place to go, and that's northern Australia. Can't tell if it's going to be from the Philippines or Indonesia or what. But it's going to be a real mess for everybody concerned unless we start preparing for it now.
That's definitely interesting. Now, some of our listeners probably don't know about halfpasthuman.com. Can you explain some of the terminology that you use about the powers that be, the other races? Can you talk a little about that for us?
Sure. Well, the powers that be, basically what we do is we take language and we use what's known as set theory, and we clump everything together, and so everything has a tendency to clump into these groups. One of the groups that we have, we labeled the powers that be, and that group goes towards the what I personally call the invisible hand. This is a small group of individuals that rule the planet very effectively, very methodically, very ruthlessly. And they are in basically a battle with the rest of mankind, or a battle with themselves, in trying to control the rest of mankind as a slave race. So in terms of the other entities, which in particular did you want to discuss?
Oh, gosh. How about the... my brain just... Here we go. How about you labeled them the powers that were now?
That's because we've had an emotional shift. Here's the situation. Under the way we look at language, originally way back when in 93 or 94 came up with this idea, and then set about over the course of 2 or 3 years thinking about language and doing all kinds of research, while doing other work, of course. Came up with the idea of attaching emotional quantifiers to language in a peculiar way that seems to be effective. these emotional quantifiers are summed up, and they are summed up for the various entities. So the powers that be entity is trucking around there in 2003, and it's all puffed up, and its emotional sum might be 20,000, and it's doing fine over 2003, 4, and 5, and then it starts running into a little bit of trouble in 2005 and 6, and so on. And around in late 2010, it hits this big bump, and it sheds all of the emotional values that it had accumulated since way back in 2003. So it is as though they have been set back hugely relative to some set of plans that they had involved themselves in. You have to understand that the emotional quantifiers that are within language are based on emotions within humans and how we feel and react to these emotions. It's just a guess on my part when I started out as to, that fear had a higher emotion than anger, but that the two were related in these different ways. And I was trying to cross-tie all these various words within the language, but the primary motivators are on the powers that are the fear and status. And status is not an emotion per se, but it is the sum of various emotions that relate to the ego and how it feels and deals with fear. So basically what's occurred is that the powers that be, those invisible hands that even control the bankers, the people that I'm talking about are those that we would never hear about, and they're the guys with their hands up the pulling the control strings on, like the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Soroses, the Bushes, the Clintons, et al. And so these people have had a setback due to a number of different circumstances over just the last few months since November 14th on. And now they've run into a real situation. So, for instance, the global revolution that is going on is promulgated by the powers that were. They have started it. They've had people fomenting it and organizing it for well over a year, and they've unleashed it. Now, what they are about to discover is that it's out of their control, and that things have changed at such a fundamental level, but they don't appreciate it. So, for instance, you'll hear a lot of people on the radio and on television say, nothing's changed in Egypt, nothing's changed, military's still in control, blah, blah, blah. And I would dispute that. The fundamental thing that has changed is that you now have a population of 80 million people